I wish I could tell you the real stories. Holy shit.
This right here is the face of pure evil, a man for all intents and purposes who got away with not just one crime, but really far too many of them. This is the Vince McMahon documentary, Mr. McMahon.
Where does the line between Vince McMahon and Mr. McMahon end?
This has been a long time coming, and I was very interested to check it out in hopes of it maybe exposing further the truly awful human being that Vince was. With the way it first opens up and the vibe that continues throughout the first episode, it had me a little bit worried. Within the first 10 minutes, it felt largely like this was going to be propaganda driven. The classic, oh well, Vince was Vince, he built a world, he was incredible at what he did. But when it comes to the episodes that would follow, and especially the final 3 episodes in this 6-part docuseries, I'm happy to say that I was wrong. And I'll get more into this in a second, but the first few episodes very much do associate with this kind of vibe where it feels almost as if they're painting Vince as almost a hero. But I promise you, the more we get into this docuseries, the more we will dive into what an awful human being that Vince McMahon was and is. The first episode opens up with Hulk Hogan basically saying, you're not really ever gonna know what happened because the promoters and people like Vince in wrestling will only ever tell you what they want you to know.
You're only gonna know what they tell you. So I just know wrestlers and promoters and know this business, so you're not gonna get the whole enchilada.
Yeah, you know, that's a really good way to go ahead and open up your docuseries, your tell-all docuseries, your truthful docuseries, with a man that hasn't told the truth since he was born onto this planet, Hulk Hogan.
Go ahead and tell you something, brother. Vince wasn't a bad guy, dude. Listen, brother, it was just the way the business was.
Well, shut the fuck up.
Vince McMahon's influence and impact is largely ignored.
Yeah, his influence largely ignored because the person behind said influence used his influence to be a piece of shit. I mean, Plankton had a ton of influence as well, as he was putting robot metal helmets on people and mind controlling them as he was trying to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula. The first episode spends a large amount of time almost painting Vince as someone you should feel sorry for. And even all the way to the end of this docuseries, they still really try and get that message across. Like, there's people who will chime in and they're like, oh no, but this and but that, even amidst all the talk about the allegations, which we'll get to in later episodes. And I just think that's fucking disgusting. Seriously. They go into detail discussing how he didn't know his father until he was 12 years old and how he grew up in a largely abusive household with his stepdad, and his attitude was to just keep going and make it through. They then talk about his start in the business and how he eventually got the company from his dad, telling the story of how it almost went to the heir apparent Gorilla Monsoon. They then go into great detail about the stories surrounding Vince McMahon and how he basically said, fuck the territory system, we're gonna revolutionize the business by doing it a new way.
And as far as Vergania was concerned, Vince was Satan. He was the devil.
Yo, Vern was so ahead of his time. This guy had a vision so crystal clear that he must have had an SR-71 in the air. It's very interesting at this point in the documentary because they discuss how Vince's mindset was essentially to watch a star grow elsewhere, and as soon as they were built as a star, he'd take them for his own company, and there was really nothing anyone could do about it because people wanted to work for Vince. And this is a bit of a sidebar here, but it's very interesting to see how this mindset and this way of doing things has kind of passed into the new generation. You see it all the time, whether it's in NXT or even with Cody Rhodes. For as much as Cody obviously began to make his name in the WWE in the late 2000s and early 2010s, he really became a star after he left. And you know, as WWE under Vince McMahon would go ahead and tell you, he wrestled all around the world. Whoa! Or I mean, you know, if we're being more specific, he wrestled around Elite World. They then go ahead and discuss how the relationship between Vince McMahon Sr. and Vince McMahon Jr. wasn't particularly great.
The day before he died, it was the only time that he told me that he loved me.
Who cares?
I don't think he liked his father, to be honest with you.
Especially towards the end, going on to say his father didn't say he loved him until just before he died.
Why did he say that? When Junior came along, he had a vision that wrestling is going to change. It can't remain the same.
Going on to essentially say that the reason their relationship soured is because Vince McMahon had taken Vince McMahon Sr.'s business and essentially tried to transform it from what it actually was, where it was pro wrestling, and take it into that entertainment, sports entertainment realm. Let me go ahead and tell you something though. I'm just really glad there's not like an alternate universe in this docuseries where Vince McMahon created AEW on TNT. I mean...
Thank you. Welcome to TNT.
They continue on in this documentary to speak about how Vince essentially tried to make it more mainstream by bringing in the likes of Mr. T and Cyndi Lauper, etc.
John Stossel's there under the premise that he wants to find out if Hulk Hogan's really as popular as the New York Times say.
This isn't really wrestling. This is wrestling.
What?
They talk about the famous John Stossel and David Schultz incident, which for those who don't know,
But Schultz just slaps the crap out of Stossel.
John Stossel was essentially trying to expose the business for being fake back then, and David Schultz said,
Go away, like
"You Vince McMahon, WWE 2K20, Ricochet promo." But with this kind of incident was its own line of controversy, where with Hulk Hogan on another talk show, he was trying to prove how tough and real these wrestlers were, but you go ahead and you try and prove just how tough and macho and real the business is with people who aren't in the business, and it's always going to result in injuries and lawsuits. And that happened here. The first episode ends with a cliffhanger regarding the future of Mr. McMahon, hinting at the future controversies that lie ahead, such as the Chris Benoit tragedy, Owen Hart, the steroid scandal, and then of course the lawsuits and the settlements as of recent years. The second episode of this docuseries goes ahead and opens up with I don't even know what to say to that. Dave Meltzer and co talk about how grueling the schedule was back in the 80s, with Bret Hart wishing he had more days off, talking about how if you don't wrestle, you don't get paid, so injury or not, lace up your boots and get to work or don't eat. They then go on to talk about how things have changed, you know, from then versus now, how wrestlers now have guaranteed contracts, they're allowed to rehab injuries, they're still getting paid, they're allowed to, you know, have some time off and actually live a life outside of the wrestling ring. They then discuss how Andre the Giant was in incredible amounts of back pain, but Vince pulled up to the shoot of The Princess Bride, and despite Andre wanting to leave the business, he was convinced to come back for WrestleMania 3 against Hulk Hogan. Yeah, whatever, man. Listen, we got Aretha Franklin on the mic right now. It's time to lock in.
Why?
Oh, come on.
They continue to talk about the history between Hogan and Andre, and again, largely driving this rhetoric about how Vince was such a workaholic and he made all this money on action figures and yada yada yada, and then Hogan basically said, "I'm on board for anything, brother."
It's not the world's worst movie.
This is literally me when I watched the critically acclaimed 2011 movie WWE's The Chaperone, starring Triple H and Ariel Winter. I'm also like 90% sure you guys have recommended No Holds Barred as a movie I should watch before, so I'm excited to see just how terrible it is when I get around to that. But now, finally getting to some things on this documentary that are actually worth a damn, you know, the good stuff, the interesting stuff, it's time to talk about the steroid scandal.
Look, can I just Stewie. Look.
Not that steroid scandal. Dr. George Zahorian with 15 counts of distributing muscle-building steroids and eventually going to jail during this entire thing.
You know, like people go to Starbucks in the morning before they go to work. People take steroids because they're wrestlers or actors or baseball players or hockey players or football players.
I mean, I feel like there's a slight difference between pumping myself with a bit of caffeine in the morning with a little pumpkin spice latte, because yes, it is pumpkin spice latte season, Hogan, and pumping myself full of some fucking steroids, brother. I can't believe this guy genuinely sat there and said that. Oh, you know, people love to... listen, dude. Listen, cameraman, dude. You know, it was no different than the way, you know, people love to go to Starbucks and buy a latte, dude. There's nothing really different, you know. It's just the boys will be boys, and that's...
I've always enjoyed bodybuilding and physiques.
Brother. Not a steroid abuser, and I do not use steroids.
She's like, oh, God, just tell the truth. It's so much easier.
That's a lie.
I said, oh yeah? You want to talk about telling the truth about the World Wrestling Federation? How about you start telling the truth, you dumb son of a bitch, about all the allegations?
Hold on. Wait a minute.
Sorry, sometimes I slip into that side of myself. It's like venom.
Do stuff like that and don't tell the truth, then
That's a lie.
it's an open door for people to come get you.
Oh yeah, is that a fact?
The stories of what's going on behind the scenes. And pulling back the curtain in the pro wrestling world can be pretty shocking.
Whoa, no, hang on a second, hang on a minute. Because when did the dean from Community get hired to speak on this whole McGill? They then touch on the fact a female companion died in a hotel room sex scandal with Jimmy Snuka, and while it was not looking good for Snuka, they essentially imply that because Snuka was one of the biggest stars in his company, if not the biggest, Vince did his absolute best to cover it up.
His girlfriend hit her head and died. The forensic pathologist who investigated thought it was a homicide, but at the time, no charges were ever filed.
Which, I mean, it goes without saying, but is absolutely disgusting that he got away with literal. They then go ahead and talk about a man called the Ring Boss, Mel Phillips, and the scandal that followed. The Ring Boys that were brought with him being sexually harassed, and Bret Hart going on to just outright call him a pedophile, and rightfully so.
Mel Phillips was a total pedophile that preyed on young boys, and if these young boys weren't complying with their requests for sexual favors, they weren't hired.
Terry Garvin and Pat Patterson also being involved in this too. They discuss how Patterson was openly gay, and while some suggest Pat may not have been involved in the aforementioned sex ring, they essentially go on to say that if Vince didn't get rid of him because of the scandal, then it was because he was openly gay and there was a bit of a gay witch hunt going on at the time, they were trying to say. But regardless, Pat Patterson was brought back a few months later anyway. And then Bruce Pritchard going on to say that he believes Pat Patterson wasn't involved at all. And I mean, again, with a lot of the things that you're gonna see in this docu-series, it's kind of a who do you believe, who do you trust, and Bruce Pritchard, quite frankly, not really one of the guys I trust, and you'll see why towards the end of the documentary, and why I don't really believe a damn thing that he says when it comes to pro Vince.
I didn't like Pat because he kept grabbing my pecker in the locker room.
You what?
He would grab my pecker. Yeah.
Did you guys complain?
To who? He's the booker. He's the number 2 guy in the office. To who?
Vince.
It's genuinely sad that this is literally abuse, and as he put it, Pat Patterson trying to touch his pecker. And because of the hierarchy at the time, all he could really do was laugh it off. Like, shit's sad, man. But as they go on to discuss, it really was the sad tragedy of the time, and as it continued in the next few decades as Vince got even more evil, this really was the reality of each situation like this. That while much of these controversies should have really ended the company and Vince McMahon, the fans didn't entirely know about a lot of this because this was pre-internet, and if you didn't read the newspaper, you'd just continue on watching the product, not knowing any wiser.
There was some girl that I think was a girl referee, that had claimed that Vince had sexually assaulted her.
Oh my gosh, there were so many scandals going on with who was dating who was sleeping with who.
Do you remember any of those?
Well, you know what? Let me try to do. I'm trying to be really cautious on doing this. I don't know what they want out in the open or not.
Rita discusses how she was forced into oral sex with Vince, and Vince saying if she didn't satisfy his needs, she wouldn't get $1 million contract and would be blackballed from the business.
I was forced into oral sex with Vince McMahon. When I couldn't complete his desires, he got really angry, pulled me on top of him, and told me again, if I wanted to have $1 million a year contract, I had to satisfy him. And if I didn't satisfy him, I was blackballed.
And then what he would go on to say is really sickening, because he essentially says, I didn't do it, but even if I did, the statute of limitations has already ran out anyway. And that's just, like, what a fucking tapped evil Donnie. Genuinely.
Once you're accused of rape, you're a rapist. But it was consensual, and actually, had it been a rape, the statute of limitations had run out. So, I mean, it's all kind of crap like that people are digging up.
Rita saying that she just wants someone to listen, and it's genuinely heartbreaking to watch.
I was scared. My wrist was all black and blue. He just didn't stop.
They didn't want to hear her story, they didn't want to look into it, they didn't want to believe her, and I think that's fucking disgusting.
People look the other way.
God, I just hope somebody listens.
They just thought it was like a woman making up a story on a rich guy.
A lot of people thought he's wearing this thing because he's trying to evoke some sort of sympathy, from the jury. I mean, that was not the case.
It's impossible to not think there was some sort of storytelling contrivance behind it.
I think it's fairly fucking obvious to anyone that saw this back then, or even anyone that's seeing it now, that the neck brace was a sympathy play.
My impression was that it was not an operation that he needed to do at that moment.
As Meltzer referred to, it was clearly not a necessary surgery on his neck, but he timed it perfectly so he could pull up to the courtroom looking like the victim, even though in actual fact, he was not. I genuinely think a lot of the scandals surrounding Vince McMahon and a lot of the way he's responded to them and responded to different things that has happened throughout his life, a more appropriate name for him would be Vince Markman. And that's not entirely just my opinion. You will literally see evidence, and that anchored later in the documentary, because he genuinely strikes me as someone who almost was so sucked into the wrestling business, especially around this time, that it's all he believed in. It's how he dealt with stuff, it's how he responded to things. He was by and large becoming Mr. McMahon even as early as the 90s. And that's me specifically talking about the early 90s. I'm not talking about the late 90s where he actually did become Mr. McMahon. I'm talking about even as early as, what, 1991 or whenever the steroid scandal happened. They then discuss how Hogan had no choice but to leave WWE for WCW, given that WCW had none of the negative Vince press. He essentially had a contract that was for less dates and more money. And compared to the WWE schedule, he essentially said,
"That doesn't work for me, brother."
The second episode ends with the mentioning of the withdrawal of the defamation lawsuit against Rita Chatterton and Geraldo Rivera in 1994. It also goes on to mention that in 2023 there was a multi-million-dollar settlement to victims of his sexual offenses, and the fact that McMahon still denies any wrongdoing. With episode 1 entitled Junior and episode 2 entitled Heat out of the way, it was now time for episode 3, Screwjob. The episode opens up talking about Wendy Richter and how she basically didn't want to lose the championship, but despite her trying to kick out and refusing to lose for real, the ref counted anyway, and the relationship was soured from there forward.
I didn't care. It was like, with the public being in an uproar, and oh my God, it really wasn't a fair count. My answer to that is, life's not fair sometimes, and, I don't fight fair. There's nothing personal. This is business. And there's nothing I wouldn't do for our business.
Do you, see what I mean?
Never ordered or directed you to take steroids. Never. It was your personal choice, definitely. Did he imply that wrestlers should use steroids? Never, Hogan answered.
Vince says he wasn't guilty of anything, and everyone pretty much says while Vince never directly told them to take steroids, it was generally implied that it was cool to do so.
He let us do it, let's put it that way, but he didn't sell it to us.
They had to replace Hulk Hogan, and the guy that pulled the sword out of the stone was Bret Hart. We have new stars. We have Bret Hart. Kind of proud to be the torchbearer for the new generation. Bret Hart's the safest guy. Bret Hart's not going to get busted with an underage girl.
Hi, I'm Bret the Hitman Hart, and I gotta say, in a couple of generations, a generational talent called Natalia is gonna really take the business by storm. But back to me, Bret Hart. This new generation had great stars like me, Bret Hart. I was a generational star of that new generation.
Bret Hart.
Me, Bret Hart. Me.
Bret Hart.
Bret Hart.
Bret Hart.
Me. There's something really hilarious about this part of the documentary, because as much as it's obviously shrouded in serious topics and everything, and that should be the focus, there's this weird part in the middle of the entire thing where Bret Hart just goes on a tangent being like, yeah,
Bret Hart.
He was the guy,
Bret Hart.
It's great. He was fantastic. And you know what, Bret?
Bret Hart.
You're absolutely fucking right. Yeah, let's go. Fucking pink and black, baby.
It took my breath away.
As soon as I heard they were going head-to-head, that was like, ooh, we're in trouble.
So I said, okay, Lex, here's the deal. We're going to do a deal. You cannot tell anybody. You can't tell WWE. You just go about your business.
That was really embarrassing. It pissed Vince off.
Ah, it was a beautiful thing.
Honestly, Eric, mood. You're telling me it pissed Vince McMahon off? Okay, do it again. They begin to discuss the start of the wars between WCW and WWE. Essentially, Eric Bischoff talks about how he'd do anything in his power to piss off Vince and the WWF, spoiling matches and finishes because he was live and they weren't. Essentially taking jabs at literally everything they would do, including this infamous segment, where Alundra Blaze throws the women's championship in the trash can. But while they were filming this docuseries, I did manage to catch up with The Undertaker and ask him about his thoughts on the new Talk Tour podcast.
I got thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, no. What were your thoughts on that?
I didn't like it.
Oh my God.
Somebody has to pay for that, and in that particular case, it was Hunter.
And then Triple H discusses how with Scott and Kev leaving at the time and Shawn being champion, it basically meant that Who else would be punished but me? I was supposed to be king, but quickly I became the jester.
They were presenting Scott Hall as Razor Ramon. They didn't say his name was Razor Ramon, but it was as close to Razor Ramon as you could get without saying, hey, Razor Ramon.
Stealing, that's not the right way to do business.
Who cares? Stealing is in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? Immediately, Vince went into sympathetic babyface mode.
Once again, victim Vince back at it again like a pair of white vans in 2016, except, damn, dumbass, you literally did this a decade earlier with the territories. You hypocrite. They then talk about Bash at the Beach 1996, where Hogan emerged to join Hall and Nash to turn heel in a shocking twist. Cody even referring to it as a punch to the gut for wrestling fans, with them largely being emotional and legitimately upset throwing things into the ring. Hogan going on to say that they were the New World Order and the rest is history. Hogan became a bad guy and WCW began to wreak havoc for how many weeks, Eric?
83 straight weeks. For 83 straight weeks. For 83 weeks? Was it 83 or was it 84? My podcast is called 83 Weeks. For 83 straight. You what?
Ah, okay, 83 weeks. Wow, that's pretty impressive, huh? Hey, Hogan, quick question from your boy. How do I feel about Andrew Lincoln?
For this man, I would do anything.
Ah, yes, you're absolutely right.
But I'd do anything for Maggie, for Glenn, all of them, I'd do it for them, because we are the Walking Dead.
Call me Sugargate one more time.
Vince is genuinely such a hypocrite at this point in the docuseries because he continues to go on about how salty he clearly was that Eric took his stars that he made, as if, again, he didn't literally do that himself with the territories.
And I don't even think Brett had a problem losing the match. It was losing it to me.
Shawn was a real dick at that time.
Oh, what's that? We're not holding back? Okay, listen here, Mr. Cameron Brink, you son of a bitch. Go to hell.
Telling on national TV that I'm banging Sonny when I'm a married man. You're crossing a line where you're messing with my family. You're messing with me on a personal level. And it's bullshit.
You know, I'm gonna go ahead and speak real quiet about this one, but all of us here at DDJ Corp, we wouldn't be mad at you if you did, you know, we'd understand. Just as long as it was prime Sonny and not Elden Ring mob looking Sonny from now. I can't say that? Okay, let's run it back. Let's do it again. Just kidding. Big fucking deal.
And I see Vince yell at him, and then I see Vince snap at him. And they ring the fucking bell. I can feel it. Like everything is coming to me now. It's like they did it. They did screw
He
you.
then continued and gets choked up about how much time he's given to Vince, which is 14 years at this point, and also talks about Owen as well. It's so fascinating seeing all this backstage footage of all of this now because it really does put into perspective just how crazy this all is and was.
I swear to God, I knew nothing.
Yeah, well, swear to God all you want, but someday God is going to strike you down.
He was out cold like a starfish. Drilled him. Probably the best thing I ever did, and he deserved every bit of that.
And then Vince McMahon going on to say in as cold of a manner as you'd expect from a reptile like him, he doesn't regret any of it.
Final nail, so to speak, in the World Wrestling Federation? Au contraire. We're just getting started.